I want you to imagine something from a second. It's late 1943. You're a German soldier dug in on some frozen hillside in Italy. Your entire life, your entire training has been built around a single idea: the disciplined, skilled rifleman. Every shot counts. Then the Americans attack, and in a terrifying flash of noise and fire, everything you thought you knew about war is just gone. What you're facing doesn't feel like an army. It feels like a force of nature, an industrial storm. These words you're looking at, they were found in the diary of a German soldier just 3 days after he wrote them. This isn't just some dry battlefield report. It's a window into a moment of pure mind-breaking shock. He was witnessing something that his training, his entire military philosophy had no answer for. And to really understand why he was so stunned, we need to unravel the story of the weapon that was causing all this chaos: the Thompson submachine gun. So before we can get to the mud and the fury of the front lines, we have to understand the German mindset. Because their military philosophy wasn't just a collection of tactics, It was a creed, something they deeply believed in. And it's that very creed that created a massive, fatal blind spot when they first came across the Thompson. You really have to appreciate how logical this was from their perspective. For the German army, the ultimate weapon was the soldier himself. Every man was a rifleman. Every single bullet was meant to be aimed, fired with purpose. Ammunition wasn't just stuff you sprayed. It was a precious, finite resource. And their rifle, the Kar 98K, was the perfect tool for that job. It was accurate, it was reliable, it was deliberate. The entire German war machine was built on this foundation, the skill of the individual warrior. So you can imagine, when German military observers first saw the Thompson back in the 1920s, they looked at it through this very specific lens. And what they saw, they completely dismissed. I mean, look at their assessment. They saw this weapon that just chewed through ammo and thought, this is wasteful, it's undisciplined. To them, it wasn't a real soldier's weapon. It was a Chicago typewriter, right? A toy for gangsters. They decided that no serious professional army could ever afford to arm its troops with something so profligate. And honestly, if you looked at the numbers back then, you'd probably agree with them. Just let that number sink in for a second. $200. In 1921, that was an astronomical amount of money, more than most American factory workers made in an entire year. This thing was a beautifully crafted but very complex piece of machinery. So from the German point of view, a nation that was always worried about resources, the idea of giving a weapon this expensive to a regular grunt, a weapon that was specifically designed to burn through ammunition, it wasn't just impractical, it was absolutely insane. Their logic was sound, but what they failed to account for was an entirely different philosophy of war. And this right here is the absolute heart of the story. The American way of war wasn't born from the traditions of the skilled rifleman. It was born on the factory floor, on the assembly line. America's solution to a tactical problem wasn't to create a better soldier, it was to build a bigger factory and just overwhelm the problem with sheer, mass-produced power. And you can see that philosophy in action right here. The Americans didn't just build the Thompson, they industrialized it. They took this expensive, complex design and re-engineered it for one thing: mass production. They stripped out the fancy, time-consuming parts and simplified everything. Look at that price drop, from $200 all the way down to $45. That's a cost reduction of over 77%. It's an incredible feat of industrial engineering, and it meant they could turn these things out by the hundreds of thousands. The numbers on this chart really tell the whole story, don't they? Germany, for all its military prowess, managed to produce just over 900,000 of its famous MP-40 submachine guns during the whole war. America, they produced nearly double that number of Thompsons, and that's not even counting the other submachine guns they made. This is the sheer industrial scale that the German high command simply could not fathom when they first dismissed the Thompson as a gangster's toy. And this number, this is the fuel for that industrial fire. 47 billion rounds of ammunition. That's a number so huge it's hard to even wrap your head around it. But what it meant, in practical terms, was that America could afford to see ammunition as disposable. It wasn't a precious resource to be conserved, it was a weapon in and of itself. While a German soldier was trained to make every shot count, an American GI could lay down suppressive fire without a second thought about the supply chain. This was the ocean of steel that was about to crash down on the German army. Okay, so we have the two competing ideas. We've got the production numbers, we've got the logistics. Now, let's go back to that hillside in Italy. This is where the paper doctrines and military theories meet the cold, hard, bloody reality of combat.
This is the moment the German rifleman's creed slammed head-on into the American industrial storm.
This quote from an officer in Tunisia perfectly captures that first moment of stunned confusion. When German troops first faced Americans in North Africa, they were baffled. They were trained to identify and focus on the 1 or 2 machine guns in an enemy squad. But now, the automatic fire was coming from, well, everywhere. It wasn't one predictable point of danger. It was a swarm, an overwhelming, distributed storm of lead coming from what felt like every single soldier. The German soldiers on the ground didn't use technical terms to describe this. Listen to the words they wrote in their diaries and letters home. Walls of lead, steel rain, continuous thunder. They literally had to invent a new vocabulary of terror for what they were experiencing. This wasn't the sharp intermittent crack of rifles they were used to. It was a constant, terrifying roar that pinned them down, broke their will to fight, and shattered their morale. And this created a tactical nightmare for them. German doctrine was all about move, find cover, aim, fire. Simple. But the Americans weren't following that script. They used a tactic called marching fire, where they would advance across open ground while firing from the hip. They created this moving wall of suppression. So just try to put yourself in a German soldier's shoes. How do you peek over your cover to take a careful, aimed shot when a constant stream of bullets is ripping the air just over your head? Their own weapons, their bolt-action rifles, simply had no counter for it.
And it wasn't just the visual of it, it was the sound. The Thompson fired a big, heavy .45 caliber round. It had this deep, percussive, hammering sound, a thump, thump, thump that was completely different from the higher-pitched rattle of German machine pistols. Veterans from both sides said you could tell who was coming just by the sound of the firefight. That sound became a weapon in itself, a psychological calling card that announced the arrival of an enemy who seemed to have endless ammunition and an endless capacity for violence.
The feeling on the ground was raw shock. But let's take a step back from the emotion for a moment and just look at the cold, brutal math behind it all. Because when you break it down by the numbers, you really start to see why this collision of worlds was so completely one-sided. This chart says it all, really. A well-trained German soldier with his rifle could get off maybe 15 aimed shots in a minute. The Thompson? 600. That's not just a little better, that's a 40-to-1 difference in potential firepower. Now, of course, no one is firing for a solid 60 seconds. But think about a typical firefight, a 2 or 3 second burst. In that time, the Thompson puts 30 rounds downrange. That's more firepower than an entire German rifle squad could put out in the same amount of time. It was a mathematical mismatch. And this math was only possible because of those 2 completely different economic realities we talked about. Get this, German logisticians actually calculated that a single burst from a Thompson cost more in ammunition than the daily pay of one of their soldiers. A single burst. Meanwhile, American GIs were firing thousands of those bursts every single day without even thinking about it. It wasn't just a different tactic, it was a different world of supply and abundance. So what's the long-term result of all this? The Thompson didn't just win firefights in World War II. It fundamentally changed the job description of an infantryman. It redefined what a soldier was and what they were expected to do in a fight. And that legacy is still with us today. Absolutely. Just look at urban combat. In the brutal house-to-house fighting in France and Italy, the Thompson allowed for a brand new, terrifyingly effective way of doing things. You suppress a building, firing right through the walls. You advance while still firing to keep the enemy's head down. And then, the most shocking part, you empty an entire magazine into a room before you even step inside. This idea of recognition by fire was completely alien to a soldier trained to make every shot count. It was horrifying, but it worked, and it became the foundation for modern close-quarters combat doctrine. So the legacy is huge. The Thompson and the philosophy behind it made this idea of distributed squad-level firepower the new standard for every army in the world. It was the ultimate proof that a massive industrial base could create a material advantage that even the best-trained soldiers couldn't overcome. And yeah, its influence is everywhere. When the Soviets studied the war, this is exactly what they saw, and it led them directly to develop the AK-47, their answer to this American storm of steel. The focus of infantry combat shifted forever, from the individual marksman to the firepower of the group. And that brings us right back to that German soldier writing in his diary, because this quote here really gets to the heart of it. For him, the shock wasn't just tactical, it was existential. It was the soul-crushing realization that this war wasn't going to be won by the things he'd been told his whole life mattered.
warrior spirit, discipline, superior breeding. It was being won by something he couldn't fight, the sheer output of American factories. The Thompson didn't just break bodies, it broke an entire worldview. And that leaves us with a pretty heavy question, one that is just as relevant, if not more so today, than it was back in 1943. The Thompson taught a really brutal lesson, that courage, skill, and training can in fact be drowned under a tidal wave of industrial might. So as we look at the conflicts of today, which are all about drones, advanced logistics, and information warfare, the question is still there. What's more important, the soldier on the front line or the vast industrial and technological system that puts them there?